Hi guys, welcome back to part 4 of my mixing and mastering series. Today we're going to be sidestepping a little bit. The past 3 have been relatively linear, and today we're going to be getting into, I want to say, the beginning of the mixing, but this still does kind of have to do with mastering a little bit. It is more of a mixing thing, but it's part of the series, but it's a little bit of a sidestep. That's all I'm going to say. All right, so what are we going to be talking about today? Today we are going to be talking about, so last time we talked about how to engineer our sounds, right? How to make our sounds fit together very, very well. Now today we're going to be introducing another element, which is the drums, right? So you see my template, my Ableton template, we have the drop, and inside of the drop we have drums and sounds. Like I said, we talked about sounds, so now we got to talk about drums. Drums are pretty straightforward, but there's a number of things that we need to look out for and be aware of, okay? So let's head over to Blender and talk about those things. All right, drums and sounds. Now, the thing with drums and sounds is that we have to understand that while they are to be collaborative, they are separate entities, and we need to treat them like separate entities. Think of them as they're teammates, but they're not the same, they're in different positions. Sounds are the quarterback, drums are the wide receiver. It's not like both of them are on the offensive line. Does that kind of make sense? What we need to recognize is that if we treat the drums as part of the sounds, we're not going to get the desired result out of the drums that we need to. That's one of the reasons why I'm such a big advocate for organizational training, and that's why I propose my template very strongly, because if I've seen a lot of producers keep their drums just in with their sounds, and because of that they completely fail to separate the two entities, and therefore when they fail to separate them, they fail to be able to make them work together collaboratively properly. Hopefully you're bearing with me. All right, so 2 things to understand real quick. I'm actually going to tuck this down under because we don't need it quite yet. One thing to understand real quick though, drums are going to determine the feel of your mix. What does that mean? Well, if you have shitty drums, your mix is going to sound like shit. If you have really clean drums, your mix is going to sound a lot better than it would if you had shitty drums, okay? Before I go any further, the thing that I want to disclaim is that is easiest achieved by having good samples, okay? If you are you don't need to be a hero, especially if you're new. If you have samples that sound like shit, dated, old, not good samples, right? Like, you can tell, right? Like, you hear a Tisoki snare and you're like, damn, that's fucking clean, And then you might hear a 2011 Vengeance Pack snare and be like, this just doesn't do it for me. Well, there's a reason. It's just not as good of a snare. It's older. It's not, it's not to date. It's far past where we should be with snares, far back there. Understand that, recognize that. You do not need to fight an uphill battle, especially if you're new. Find some good samples. Let me recommend some for you. My samples are very strong. Ivory's samples are very strong. They're not on Splice, but his pack is very, very affordable and extremely worth it. It's my most used sample pack, excuse me. Tisoki is on Splice. His drums are excellent. Eliminate is on Splice. His drums are excellent. Tynan is on Splice. His drums are excellent. Virtual Riot is on Splice. His drums are excellent. Did I say Eliminate yet? I'm not sure. Eliminate as well, okay? Mode Step is another one I want to say too. All those are on Splice. Those have really, really good drum samples for you to use. If you are still struggling finding good, clean sounding samples, pay those a visit. It will help you tremendously, okay? All right, so drums determine the feel of the mix. That being said, though, I want to demonstrate exactly how that works, what I mean by that. So real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you this. This is the track that the demo that we were working on yesterday. I added one more element, which is this lead right here. I'll play it for you so you don't get confused. That's simply just to fill out the space a little bit more. And then we added in these drums. I'm going to show them I'm going to show each of them to you. So we have a white noise ride. It's traditional in the template. Okay. We have a crash. a little trap snare fill right here. Cool. We have our kick. It's one of the ivory ones, Barthes. Okay, and then we have our snare right here. It's another ivory one, Build 3. All right, and then we have our side chain is on right now, and we're going to talk about that more in a second, but it's important that I disclaim that. All right, so let's listen to what it sounds like. Sounds good. Sounds really good. Now, what I want to show you is if I have a Camel Crusher on here, I'm just going to turn on the Camel Crusher. We're going to distort this a little bit to essentially demonstrate your drums being overblown, sounding like shit, just being shitty drums. Now let's listen again and hear what this sounds like. What you can notice from that is that not only do the drums sound like absolute dicks, but your whole perception of the track is that now the whole track sounds like dicks, okay? That is exactly what I'm trying to convey here. The drums determine the way your track sounds. If you have clean, strong drums, that is the easiest way to make your track feel clean and strong, okay? I'm going to demonstrate that another way. Let me turn the Camel Crusher off right here, and instead I'm going to turn it on the sounds group. I have a Camel Crusher right here. We're going to turn it on, same thing, we're just going to distort it. Let me turn it down a little bit because when I was experimenting it like blew the fuck out. It was way too loud. All right, we're going to play it. So even though this is completely distorted now, I want you to pay attention to how it sounds. It sounds weird, right? Because like even though this is completely distorted and so far gone, it almost doesn't sound completely terrible because the drums are still like nice and clean. It almost sounds like weirdly stylistic. Like, I don't know, hard to explain, but you get what I'm telling you. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The drums lead the mix. The drums determine how your mix sounds, okay? Not the sounds, the drums. That being said, of course, you need to properly, take care of your sounds, mix them the right way, make sure that they're not blown out. But all that to be said, your drums are doing the bulk of the lifting when it comes to how your mix is perceived. So, what can we do to make sure that our drums sound as good as we possibly can? Well, one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate here is that I literally don't have anything going on here except for just the sounds being what they are, and I've adjusted the volumes to be proper. That was done by ear. That's not really something that I can demonstrate for you with metrics or anything. That'll simply come with you give it 2 days of practice, you'll be able to make sure that all your drums are properly leveled, all right? Just volume levels, no EQ, no compressors, no nothing. That is to demonstrate that good sample choices are the most important factor. Got it? Cool. Now, what else though? Because we want our drums to sound good, not only in the context of themselves, which, they do because we just talked about they're good samples, but how do we get it to sound good in context of the whole mix when they're working in tandem with the sounds? First thing we have to talk about is mandatory, which is the side chain. How do I have my side chain set up? Under the hood, in my kick and snare channels right here, there is a MIDI track with an external instrument that is sending to this sidechain device, one of which is going to the kick, the other one is going to the, right here, the snare module. Okay, so there's a kick and a snare module. If you have the template, they're automatically linked. If you want to do it manually for whatever reason, this is how you do it, all right? It's just an external instrument. MIDI is being sent to the kick input and the snare input. And then this sidechain tool just functions automatically. Further than that, we can adjust the speed of the kick sidechain and the snare sidechain. So for example, you want a really deep Illenium sounding sidechain, you can drop this down to 20 and listen. Right? So that's how it works there. I like mine a bit snappier. I usually keep mine somewhere between 40 and 55. On this one, we're going to go 50. For the snare, the speed that I keep it at is completely determined by how large the body of the snare is, how long the tail is. So for a quick snappy trap snare, I will keep it a lot tighter, maybe up near 40. But for something big and fat like this dubstep snare, I'm gonna go down around like 30, and we're gonna play it like there. Cool. So that's the side chain, and that is step one in making sure that we are making the drum sound as clean as possible. What is the side chain doing though? It's important that you understand exactly what is happening. What is happening with the side chain is that every single time these MIDI clips trigger, we are creating a hole in the sound. I can show you under the hood. This is a Serum FX, and this is the distortion module set to X Shaper, which is essentially the volume is down when it is over here in this position, and the volume is up when it's over here in this position. And then when the envelope strikes, you can see it's down right here, and then it comes back. So what that is doing is that's cutting a little hole in the sound. The volume goes to 0 and then comes back up. So as soon as the kick hits, volume 0, and then very shortly after, as you can see by this envelope, it comes back up and there's sound again. All right, so that makes it so that there's a nice little pocket, a perfect little pocket that we can just tuck those drums into, okay? Tuck those little drums into the pocket. It sounds substantially better. You need to have a good side chain. I cannot recommend this side chain tool enough. I will make sure that I link it, or it's in the template, so you guys can grab it that way. You can also use like a shaper box, that's fine. I have no qualms with that. Personally, I had difficulty using it, so I made my own, and I find this to be easier, but that's just me. And that's all. Okay. Now, what else can we do to ensure that our drums and our sounds have an optimal side-by-side relationship, collaborative relationship, non-competitive relationship? Well, this is an advanced tactic, okay? I'm going to disclaim that before I go any further, because if you are super new here and you're not quite ready for advanced tactics, I would maybe watch this part, but I would tune it out, not utilize it yet, because we're going to be diving a little bit deep here with something that is probably over your head a tiny bit. What we can do is we can group these together. So in our sounds, we're going to create another group of just the content that is in the sounds group, or the majority of the content, the heaviest content, the biggest sounds, for example. I'm saying that because you'll notice in some of my projects, I don't keep everything in the group I'm about to make, but a lot of the things I do. I'll talk more about that later, but you need to understand the principle of what's going into it first. We're gonna make a group, and I'm gonna call this Clipper. Ooh, we know that word. That was from just the last section, right? 2 sections ago. Yeah, we know that word. We talked about that word. But why would you put a Clipper on this group? Great question. I have the answer. So I'm going to use a clip shifter. The reason I'm going to use a clip shifter, it's another free plugin. If you're not familiar with it, it's very similar to G-Clip, but it has a slightly different clipping algorithm. Remember how we talked about different, let's see, over here. Different audio drivers have different clipping algorithms. Well, guess what? Different clipping plugins also have different clipping algorithms. G-Clip, from what I found, is the most straightforward and unbiased. Clip Shifter has a little bit of bias to it, but it makes things sound a bit cleaner. Now, that's not what we want at the mastering stage when we're testing what our true sound should be like. We want it to be harsh and aggressive, right? We want to understand exactly what the flaws are in our mix with no masking. That being said, when we're using this right here, we are more so concerned with it sounding good, and Clip Shifter's bias allows what we're going to be using this clipper for to sound better. So what are we going to be using this clipper for? Well, I want to show you something. Let me turn this off real quick, and I want you to pay attention to this audio meter right here as I play just the sounds one more time. What do you notice? You should notice that the sound is exceeding the 0 decibel threshold. Oh, see, there's that guy again. It's going to be consistent throughout the program. When we are exceeding that 0 decibel threshold, that is taking up energy. Think of it this way. So here's the threshold, right? And here's our sounds. They're not being stopped by that threshold. They're just going past. Energy up, energy up, energy up, energy up, energy up, energy up. They're exceeding far past the 0 decibel threshold, and they're taking up more energy than they might be, or than they necessarily should be. What happens with that? Well, quite simply is that, like we talked about yesterday, there's a hierarchy. This group is going to go into the sounds group. There's nothing there except for the sidechain guy, of course. Sounds group going into the drop group, and then there's nothing there. The drop group goes into submaster, and that's where we see our clipper. But guess what? What else is reaching that clipper right there? What else is making it straight to that clipper? Our drums. Same thing here. Look, we have our kick and our snare. They're in the drums group. The drums group goes into the drop group. There's nothing there. The drop group goes into the submaster. So both of these elements are meeting each other at this G clip, and they're both going to be hitting that ceiling, fighting against each other to try to cut through. You see where the problem is, right? We want our drums to cut through because the drums determine the feel of the mix. So what can we do? Quite simple. When we have this clipper here on this clipper group for the sounds, we turn that on, and then just like that, our sound is stopped out at 0, okay? When it's stopped out at 0, now the drums essentially have a head start. They can take, look, they're taking up more energy. They're exceeding that 0 decibel threshold. They're taking up more energy, but that's what we want to have happen. The drums have a head start. These guys are getting stopped at the 0 decibel threshold. They're not exceeding. They're not taking up more space than they should be. Again, because remember, at some point, we're going to cut everything off at the 0 decibel threshold anyway. We want the drums to poke through more. So it's cool if they take up that extra energy, but when we prohibit our sounds from doing so, it allows the drums to have that preference. Does that make sense? I really hope it does. I'm doing my best to explain it in a manner where that makes sense. So we're letting our drums go past the 0 decibel threshold. We're not letting our sounds. Therefore, the drums are getting ahead of the synths. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the best way that I can explain it. All right. So that's why we introduce a clipper right there on that clipper group. That's one of the things that I've been doing over the past 8 or so months, and it's helped my sound a lot. Now, another thing that we can do, so this is becoming a more stylistic discussion, okay? This extra advanced, okay? So again, if you're new, you probably should have turned away before the first little bit about the clipper, but you should definitely not practice this next part. This is not for you yet, okay? For the more advanced users, you can pay attention here and try to understand what's going on. All right, so stylistic distortion, what is it? Why would we want it? Well, stylistic distortion is basically when you blow your sounds up a little tiny bit for the sake of sounding, distorted and cooler. A lot of dubstep synths do this. A lot of rap records are doing this now. And you can achieve that sound with this setup right here. All you have to do is push your sub level up. What is going to happen when you do that? Well, think of it this way. Here's your ceiling, all right? Here's your sub. Your sub is taking up the majority of the space in your mix, all right? And then we're going to say, for the sake of example, that your everything else sounds are just chilling right up in here, okay? So ceiling, here's your everything else group. It's chilling right up in here. Here's your ceiling, here's your sub. So what happens when you press that sub up? When you're pushing that sub up, what happens to this everything else? It gets squished and squashed down and starts distorting, and it's getting pushed up against that ceiling. It's tightening up. You're going to hear exactly what I'm talking about. Let me demonstrate it for you. We're going to play these sounds, and I'm going to slowly push this sub up. Hear what happens. You get that thick, fat sounding distortion. We can use this as stylistic distortion. So what I'm trying to say here is that we can push this sub a little bit to preference if you want to achieve that sound. If not, that's fine. If it's not for your style of music, no problem. I have been using this lately. I thoroughly enjoy it. I think it sounds really cool. And this is another way that we can get it done, and I'm a big fan of it. So that's why I'm showing it to you. So let's listen one more time. And here's the cool thing, right? Again, because we have our clipper on this group and we're stopping out all of these sounds at 0 decibels, our drums are still coming through completely unscathed. So even though now if we had this clipper off, because of how much energy the sub is taking, the sub would be pushing far through that 0 decibel threshold. Watch, listen. Look, that shit is far up through that fucking point, right? When we turn that clipper on, we're getting that same exact effect, except the drums are still coming through clean. So when we play them together, listen. Right? So even though we have shitty, way too much distortion down here in the sounds, we have completely unscathed, clean drums. That is how you keep your drums separate from your sounds. That is how you utilize that relationship for the benefit of your mix, okay? That's pretty much all that I got for this section. I showed you how to optimize your drum and sound relationship, and how to use clipping in place in order to give your drums a little bit of a head start, and then finally how to use stylistic distortion with the sub if you want to. Again, that is an advanced maneuver, so I really wouldn't utilize that unless you very thoroughly know what you're doing. But again, the whole purpose of me doing this series is to introduce new tactics to you and to those that are wanting to go that extra mile. So feel free to toy around with it, but be mindful that that is an advanced maneuver. All right, okay guys, that's it for this one. We're gonna wrap up, and I will see you on the next installment of the mixing and mastering series. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.